Imagine the year is 1348. Half your neighbors are coughing blood. Your streets reek of corpses, and priests say God is punishing the world. But instead of blaming rats or fleas, your town council decides someone must have poisoned the wells. Who? The Jews. Within months, mobs dragged entire communities to the pyres, confessions ripped out under torture, debts canceled with ash and screams. This wasn't random chaos. It was organized mass murder masquerading as self-defense. By the end, hundreds of towns burned their minorities alive. Think plagues are just about disease? Think again. This was politics of panic with blood. Picture Europe in 1348. Entire villages vanish in weeks. The Black Death isn't a slow burn. It's a lightning strike of horror. Buboes swell like black grapes in armpits. Tongues rot. People vomit blood until they collapse. Chroniclers described carts rolling through cities, heaped with the dead like fish in a market. Half of Florence gone. Whole Swiss valleys abandoned. And here's the worst part. Nobody understood why. Germ theory wouldn't come for 500 years. People thought it was divine punishment, poisonous air, or the alignment of Saturn and Jupiter. Fear needed a face. And when the bodies piled higher than the church altars, suspicion turned outward. Someone must have caused this. Someone must have poisoned the water. In Strasbourg, Basel, Mainz, rumors swirled. The Jews were paid by dark forces to spread poison dust. Convenient, isn't it? Because once you've got a scapegoat, you've also got an excuse to seize their homes, cancel their debts, and torch them alive in the marketplace. And if you think this sounds like medieval conspiracy theory, well, have you checked Twitter lately? Panic always finds its villain. But the hysteria didn't start in the streets. It was written into law. If you thought medieval justice was about fairness, think again. In 1348 to 49, the plague panic wasn't just about mobs losing control. It was councils, bishops, and princes scripting the play. When authorities arrested Jews accused of well poisoning, the evidence was laughable. But under medieval law, truth could be squeezed out of flesh. Torture chambers rang with screams as men were stretched on racks, crushed with iron boots, or dangled by their thumbs until joints snapped. And surprise, surprise, confessions poured out. Yes, we poisoned the wells with powder from Toledo. Yes, the rabbis sent us orders from abroad. The stories matched because the torturers wrote them. Chroniclers like Heinrich of Diessenhofen recorded these so-called confessions in chilling detail. But here's the real kicker. The accusations often named accomplices, hundreds at a time. A perfect snowball effect. One tortured man's confession condemned his entire community. Imagine signing away your life just to stop the pain, knowing your words would burn your neighbors too. This wasn't about truth. It was theater. The crowd wanted poisoners, the rulers wanted scapegoats, and the torturers wanted results. Justice was literally manufactured with broken bones, and once the truth was set, the stage for slaughter opened wide. February 14th, 1349. While lovers exchange gifts today, Strasbourg held a different kind of Valentine's feast. Chroniclers tell us that nearly 2,000 Jews were herded into the city's cemetery, locked inside wooden houses hastily built for one purpose: fire. Council minutes survive showing the execution was not spontaneous, but pre-planned. The city had debated whether to protect its Jewish minority. Some argued Jews had lived peacefully there for generations. But fear debt, and greed won. On that cold winter morning, soldiers dragged families from their homes, infants clutched in their mothers' arms, old men begging to be heard. Inside the wooden enclosures, they were given one choice: convert to Christianity or burn alive. Many refused. Flames devoured them while the council watched. What makes this massacre even darker is the aftermath. Property seized, debts erased. Many Christian citizens owed money to Jewish lenders. Conveniently, the fire canceled every obligation. The chronicles don't just mention the screams, they mention the balance sheets. Imagine watching your neighbors incinerated and then erasing your mortgage as smoke filled the sky. That's not just hysteria. That's economics dressed in holy fire. But Strasbourg wasn't alone. The fire spread up and down the Rhine. Travel upriver from Strasbourg, and you hit Basel, where the plague hysteria became industrial. In January 1349, city leaders rounded up the Jewish community, hundreds of men, women, and children, and forced them into a wooden structure built on an island in the Rhine. Imagine the scene. Icy water lapping around the banks, crowds pressing forward to see their neighbors condemned. The structure was not a prison. It was a pyre. Once everyone was inside, guards lit the building like a festival bonfire. The chronicles say the flames could be seen for miles, rising higher than Basel's cathedral spire. The screams were drowned by cheers. And afterward, Basel's council decreed that no Jew would ever again be allowed to live there for 200 years. Think about that. An entire city made ethnically pure overnight, not by plague, but by paranoia and politics. The fire killed hundreds, but the law erased thousands more futures. It was ethnic cleansing in the name of survival. And the survivors? Only those who agreed to forced baptism were spared, their identities obliterated in holy water. But the Rhine towns weren't the only places drowning in fire. Frankfurt's panic brought another twist. In July 1349, Frankfurt offered its Jews a deal worthy of the devil: convert or die. The plague had already battered the city, but fear still needed a scapegoat. Rumors spread that Jews had poisoned the wells using bags of powder smuggled in from abroad. Where did these powders supposedly come from? Spain. As if a plague-devastated continent needed an international Jewish conspiracy to make sense of it all. Chroniclers describe guards storming the Judengasse, corralling families into squares. Some were given baptismal water, others the flames. Parents faced a grotesque dilemma: renounce their faith and survive as outcasts, or cling to it and watch their children burn. Many chose martyrdom, recorded in Hebrew chronicles as Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name. The violence was total. Houses looted, synagogues torn apart, sacred texts thrown into the streets and trampled. The Jewish quarter was left a blackened ruin. And just like Strasbourg, the survivors' debts were canceled along with their lives. That wasn't coincidence. It was profit wrapped in piety. Imagine if every modern economic crash blamed one group of people, then justified wiping them out as a solution. That's not divine punishment. That's financial cleansing. And if Frankfurt shows the cruelty of choice, Mainz shows the cruelty of betrayal. Mainz, one of the most important cities on the Rhine, had long been a center of Jewish life. Its community produced scholars, rabbis, and poets whose works still survive. But in 1349, when the plague's paranoia peaked, that prestige offered no shield. Here's the twist. At first, Mainz's city leaders swore to protect their Jewish neighbors. The archbishop even promised them safety. But as mobs gathered outside the ghetto walls, those promises melted. The council, fearing its own citizens more than God, betrayed the very people it had pledged to defend. Chroniclers report that armed mobs stormed the Jewish quarter, setting homes ablaze and cutting down anyone who fled. Some Jews, realizing no help was coming, armed themselves in a desperate last stand. For a brief, shocking moment, the defenders repelled the attackers, killing several rioters. But the numbers were hopeless. By nightfall, thousands were dead, slaughtered in streets that had once rung with prayers and learning. Mainz's rulers, conveniently, canceled all debts owed to Jewish creditors in the aftermath. A massacre was recast as divine justice, but the balance books told the truth. This wasn't God's will. It was accounting with blood. And yet, even worse was coming, because Cologne turned massacre into spectacle. Cologne in 1349 turned massacre into a festival. Chroniclers describe it as though the entire city had gathered for a carnival, except the main attraction wasn't music or dancing. It was the annihilation of their Jewish neighbors. Rumors spread that Jews had plotted to poison the Rhine itself, so guards rounded up families and drove them into hastily prepared enclosures. Instead of secret trials or midnight burnings, Cologne's leaders made the killings public theater. The victims were paraded through streets where they had lived for centuries, mocked and spat upon by crowds of former neighbors. Then came the fire. Whole families tied together, bodies consumed as one. The pyres lit up the night like fireworks. Children were forced to watch their parents burn before being thrown in themselves. The mob cheered, and afterward, celebrated in the ransacked homes of the dead. Imagine a block party where the music is screaming and the souvenirs are your neighbor's jewelry. That was Cologne's carnival. And the lesson? Hatred doesn't hide. It sells tickets. But not every city chose flames. Some had their own creative methods of extermination, as Erfurt proved. In March 1349, Erfurt unleashed a slaughter so brutal that archaeologists only uncovered the evidence centuries later. The city's Jews were accused of poisoning wells despite the fact that the plague hadn't even struck Erfurt yet. Fear had outpaced disease. The council ordered the Jewish quarter attacked. Hundreds of men, women, and children were herded into their synagogue and surrounding buildings. The doors were barred. Then the structures were set ablaze. Those who tried to escape through windows were cut down in the streets. The rest burned or suffocated in the smoke, their prayers echoing off stone walls. In 1998, excavations unearthed a medieval Jewish treasure hoard buried beneath the city, a desperate attempt by families to hide wealth they knew they wouldn't live to reclaim. Coins, silverware, and jewels left behind like a frozen scream in the soil. Erfurt's massacre shows how quickly panic could move from rumor to ruin. No plague required, just the idea of it. The Jews weren't wiped out by disease but by neighbors with torches. And if Erfurt buried its guilt underground, Worms recorded its massacre in chilling detail. Worms was one of the most storied Jewish communities in medieval Europe, a place where Jewish learning had flourished for centuries. By mid-1349, it became a slaughterhouse. The city's chronicles describe how mobs stormed the ghetto, armed with axes, clubs, and torches. Families fled into the synagogue, hoping sacred walls would shield them. Instead, attackers set the building alight, trapping hundreds inside. Others chose suicide rather than fall into the mob's hands. Hebrew accounts from survivors describe fathers cutting the throats of their own children to spare them torture. One mother reportedly threw herself into the flames with her infant, preferring ash to humiliation. The Christian chroniclers recorded it coldly. They burned the Jews in their synagogue. For the mob, this was justice. For the council, it was opportunity. Debts erased, properties confiscated. Worms' once vibrant Jewish community was extinguished in a single week. And here's the cruel irony. Within months, plague still struck the city anyway. The supposed poisoners were gone, but death came just the same. The Jews hadn't spread the plague. Rats and fleas had. But by then, worms had traded neighbors for ashes. And if Worms' chronicles drip with blood, Nuremberg's records reveal cold calculation. If Cologne was a carnival and Worms a bloodbath, Nuremberg was a courtroom turned execution ground. In 1349, its council didn't just unleash a mob. They staged an official decree. Jews were accused of conspiring with foreign poisoners to contaminate wells, and the trial was over before it began. Witnesses? Tortured. Confessions? Manufactured. Sentences? Death. The entire Jewish quarter was sealed off. Families were dragged into the marketplace, where wooden structures had already been prepared. The executions unfolded in bureaucratic order, lists checked, names crossed out as bodies fell. This was not chaos. It was administration. And afterward, property inventories were carefully updated, showing which Christian families acquired which Jewish houses. A historian once called Nuremberg's massacre a pogrom with paperwork. Imagine genocide processed like tax returns. That's what made it so chilling. The efficiency stripped away even the illusion of passion. It wasn't rage. It was policy. But Nuremberg wasn't the end. The plague panic reached as far as the Alps, where Zurich chose fire over reason. Zurich, tucked against its tranquil lake, seemed safe from the chaos. But in September 1349, its leaders turned the city into another furnace. Rumors spread that Jews had poisoned the wells, not just in Zurich, but across all of Switzerland. Councils decided drastic action was necessary. Hundreds of Jews were arrested, their possessions seized. Then came the fires. Chroniclers describe families burned alive on the city's outskirts, their screams mingling with church bells. A few were forced into baptism first, emerging as hollow survivors in a city that no longer wanted them. Zurich's pogrom was part of a wider Swiss purge. Basel, Bern, Chur, St. Gallen. In 1 year, nearly every Jewish community across Switzerland was eradicated. It was systematic, a clean sweep under the guise of salvation. And like everywhere else, the plague still came anyway. Zurich burned its Jews and still buried its dead. The supposed cure only deepened the grave. And as the Rhine burned, the killings spread farther, into France and Spain, where mobs mixed religion with rage. By 1349, the hysteria had spread beyond the Rhine valleys into France and Spain. In Paris, mobs stormed Jewish neighborhoods, spurred by whispers that Jews had brewed powders to kill Christians. In Toulon, an entire community was murdered in one night. In Aragon and Catalonia, rumors linked the plague to Jewish doctors, twisting healers into villains. Barcelona's records describe how crowds attacked Jewish physicians who had risked their own lives tending plague victims. The irony? Some of the best medical knowledge in Europe came from Jewish scholars. Yet fear transformed them from saviors into supposed assassins. One chronicler noted that after riots in Spain, not one Jew was left alive in the town. These massacres weren't random explosions. They were synchronized across borders, fueled by letters, sermons, and gossip that spread as fast as the disease. The plague was continental, but so was the violence. Europe wasn't just burying its dead, it was burying its minorities in mass graves. The Black Death killed 25 million. The pogroms added thousands more, forgotten under the plague's shadow. But the story doesn't end in fire. It ends in silence. And that silence tells us as much about today as about 1349. So let's step back. We began with the image of a medieval town choking on corpses, its leaders desperate for answers. And we've walked through the inferno that followed. From Strasbourg's Valentine's Day massacre to Basel's burning island, from Mainz's betrayal to Worms's synagogue inferno, we've seen how plague didn't just kill bodies, it killed trust, community, and entire cultures. The Black Death was Europe's pandemic. The pogroms were Europe's self-inflicted wound. The pattern is grotesquely clear. Fear strikes. Leaders scramble. A convenient scapegoat appears. And once the mob gets permission, mercy is gone. Councils recorded confessions extracted under racks and hot irons as if they were fact. Debts vanished with the smoke of bodies. Cities congratulated themselves for purification, even as fleas and rats went on spreading death anyway. In every case, the supposed cure for the plague, the annihilation of Jewish communities, did nothing, except make the world bloodier. And here's what makes this story even more tragic. These weren't isolated incidents. From Cologne to Zurich, Paris to Barcelona, the massacres formed a map of coordinated madness. Rumors traveled like wildfire, sermons fanned the flames, and rulers discovered that exterminating minorities could double as debt relief and property redistribution. Theology, economics, and fear fused into a single, unstoppable force. Panic became policy. The chroniclers left us details sharp enough to cut across centuries. Basil's decree banning Jews for 200 years. Mainz's archbishop who promised protection, then watched his people burn. Hebrew memorial books that record parents killing their own children to save them from torture. These aren't legends. They're lines inked in blood on parchment, fragments of communities that had thrived for centuries before being erased in a season of fear. And yet, even in erasure, something survived. Archaeologists unearthing treasure hoards in Erfurt, scholars preserving Hebrew elegies of those who chose martyrdom. Council minutes revealing how debts were canceled in the very same meetings that authorized burnings. Survivors carried the memory forward, whispering what happened when plague and politics joined hands. Their stories remind us that forgetting isn't an accident. It's a choice. Europe remembered the plague but buried the massacres. Rats and fleas became the villains in history books, while the victims of human hatred faded to footnotes. But history whispers louder if you listen. And when you listen, the parallels are chilling. Think it's impossible for panic to spiral into scapegoating today? Look around. Conspiracies blaming immigrants for disease. Politicians framing minorities as the reason for economic collapse. Rumors that travel faster than facts. In 1349, it was poisoned wells. In 2020, it was foreign viruses and engineered plagues. Different centuries, same mechanics. Panic doesn't care about progress. It only cares about targets. The real horror of the Black Death's well-poisoning panic isn't just the body count. It's the blueprint. A blueprint of how quickly fear can curdle into hatred, how fast neighbors can become executioners, how authority can wrap theft and murder in the robes of religion and law. And if that blueprint worked once, it can work again. Unless we learn. So what do we take away from this blood-soaked Valentine's Day? This burning island in the Rhine? This trail of ashes across Europe? Gratitude, perhaps, that modern medicine has pulled us out of the darkness. But also a warning. Plagues pass. But the politics of panic never really dies. It mutates. It waits for the next crisis. And when it comes, it asks the same question Strasbourg asked in 1349. Who will we burn this time? The past offers us a mirror, and the reflection is ugly. But it's also a choice. We can repeat the cycle, or we can finally break it. That's the haunting truth of Europe's forgotten massacres. So what do you think? If panic struck tomorrow, would we be any better? Comment your thoughts below, share the horror so others know the truth, and subscribe for more untold dark history. Like this video if you're glad hysteria doesn't control your water supply today. Because history proves it. Fear kills faster than any plague.